Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Noma Cork by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Noma Cork Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
Charlie Foley first got interested in wine when he was studying classics at university. After spells in South Africa and Argentina, he landed a job at Christie's, where he's gone on to become a brilliant and flamboyant auctioneer. Our fascinating chat covers everything from the evolving fine wine scene to how to work a room, Charlie's love of fashion and creativity, to his appearances on Channel 4's The Great Auction. Hey Charlie, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm absolutely brilliant. How lovely to hear your voice. And you've just been for a run, haven't you brave man, on a hot day?
Yeah, so I'm glad there's no video because I look terrible.
You never look terrible. You're always one of the most stylishly dressed men I know.
I try.
Listen, so much I want to ask you. I mean, I think most people don't really know what an auctioneer does, particularly a wine auctioneer. So we're going to deep dive into that.
Neither do I most of the time.
Yeah, let's begin with your origins. Just, where you were born, brought up. I have a feeling it's somewhere exotic, was it?
If Yorkshire is exotic, then yes. Sadly, it's not. My parents had just moved back from Florida, so I'll never forgive them because I would have a green card and not be paying tax, wouldn't I? But I'd also be a Republican and shooting raccoons on a veranda or something.
Yeah, I could see you doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, so Yorkshire. I was born in York. I was brought up on the moors. My parents still live there. So that's sort of how it all started for me.
And they were great foodies. They still are, aren't they?
Yeah, they're foodies. Yeah, my dad was a chef a long time ago, but he's not anymore. But yeah, so he still makes wonderful food, and I probably got into wine through sort of Sunday lunches, really, by him opening something and then we're having something. Nothing particularly amazing. My family are all sort of tea people. My grandparents were farmers that still are. My grandmother's 103 now.
Wow.
But tea is the thing in Yorkshire rather than wine, really.
Where are they farmers? In Yorkshire?
Just on the moors.
Not at 103, I'm sure. But
no, she's not anymore. My grandfather passed away, but still no wine.
and what was your earliest memory of wine? It was sitting drinking with your parents, was it?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I probably wasn't, aware of what I was drinking or what it was, sort of thing. Not until uni did I really get interested in it. But I was certainly, I think for me, wine is the semantics. Sitting in the garden with my parents, putting the world to rights over a glass of wine. It's just sort of a liquid that helps the occasion, and I wasn't really interested in the academic side of it until later.
I mean, you studied classics, university, got a first. You specialised in the ancient wine trade in Greece and Rome, which is really interesting. Do we have any idea of what the Greeks and the Romans drank?
We're certainly in Rome. We've got more idea because there's more records. Pliny the Elder was, a great writer on the subject. So we know that they were growing Falernian, for example, which we think could have been Greco de Tufo, or it could have been Aglianico. We're not quite sure whether it was white or red. We know that they were making Alban on the slopes of Pompeii. And Cacuban was another great variety that they were making. So we know lots of these things that were happening through the records, and then through amphorophynes in particular in the Mediterranean. We know lots more of those.
Yeah, so they spread grapevines, those two cultures really, didn't they, around the Mediterranean and further afield, to England for a start.
Yeah, well, it started through Phoenicia. That was probably the cradle of wine, really. Then through Greece, through Rome. The way it got up through France was the French army, really, started marching from Provence up towards the UK, particularly under Hadrian when he was trying to conquer the UK, and instead of drinking the water, they would plant grapes up along that sort of area in order that the Roman army could supply itself with wine. So that's why sort of the Rhone Valley and Burgundy became sort of the particular route towards the UK for wine, really.
Yeah, and in those days, safer to drink wine and water, and that was still true in the Middle Ages, even into the kind of 19th century, wasn't it?
Yeah, Edward Gibbon, who Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, he thought that the Romans went mad because the lead poisoning through the aqueducts and everything. So probably better to drink wine. Still is, right? Water.
I think so. I just wonder how the ancients regarded drunkenness. Were they slightly censorious about it?
Some were, like Galen and Seneca, particularly because, they were on the sort of more medical side of it. But the ancient writers like Pliny, they loved it, particularly because wine equaled sex. That was the key point, really. And if you look at all the frescoes in Pompeii, it was the satyrs and all of the sort of, huge phalluses and things. So that's what, really led to it. And I think there was a great quote from Pliny that was something about monstrous dreams of lustfulness, that was related to wine. And have you ever seen that great film, Fellini's Satyricon, which is about...
No, but I should, I think.
Yeah, you should see that. And it's about this feast where they're all sort of sitting around like spitting at the slaves from a kylix with this great wine. And then they all just get totally drunk and, proper Fellini sort of like festival of Bacchanalia, really. It's a great film.
Sounds like the Grand Bouffe, except they didn't eat each other, or didn't kill
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no carnivorous stuff there going on.
Just wondered what jobs you did post-university and when you joined Christie's.
So the wine stuff probably started at university because I was doing classics. So I was doing 3 hours study time a week, and all my friends that I was living with were doing law and medicine, and proper things actually mattered. And so I ended up getting a job in a restaurant, which was the one on top of the Baltic Art Gallery in Newcastle. And I ended up doing the sort of wine service on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and buying the wine on a Monday. So I sort of really got interested in running the whole wine service, and that was the sort of start of it for me in terms of academic interest. And
then you applied to Christie's?
Not immediately. I moved to Argentina and South Africa for 6 months each. So in South Africa, I worked at Steenberg with J.D. Pretorius for a while. So that's quite fun. And in Argentina, I worked with a guy called Charlie O'Malley, doing wine tours sort of around Mendoza. So, that was really the sort of, start of the sort of geography wine interest part of it.
And then the Christie's bit was obviously when you got back, but did you apply? Or?
Yeah, when I got back, I worked for a wine merchant, Fine and Rare, for a bit. And then I met one of the specialists at Christie's at a wine tasting, and they had a temp job, and they said, "Hey, you look like our guy. So do you want to come and try it out?" So I took a leap on a temp job, and here I am 11 years later.
And what was the job initially to train to be an auctioneer, or was it just working in the wine department?
No, just to the admin, just to do all the paperwork and stuff. Auctioneering I've only done for about 6 years. It takes a while. You have to go through the auctioneering school and that sort of thing. So, I've managed to do it.
And did you apply to do that, or did they say, "Hey, this guy's a bit of a personality, he'll be good at it"?
You can put yourself forward. I mean, there's different types of auctioneers. So, some people at head of departments will auctioneer just because it's their specialist interest. And then there are people who I suppose are a bit more theatrical and will do, sort of charity auctions and different sort of auctions across the company. Yeah. I'm probably more in the latter category.
I think you definitely are. I've seen some quite boring auctioneers who are sort of a bit actuarial, really. It sounds like they're bean counting in a way, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've got to know the numbers. You've got to do the technical stuff and be on the right foot and that sort of stuff. But then, most of it is it's your last sales pitch, really. It's your last opportunity to add atmosphere, which adds a little bit of interest. But, that's the idea, I think.
Tell us about your mentors, because I know that you worked with David Ellsworth, late David Ellsworth, who I liked very much, and he died way too young. Just wonder what you learned from David, because he was a character as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, so David, absolutely sort of wonderful man who just taught me really to work a room. And I think that's so essential in the wine trade, just because, that you haven't got all of that much time. You've got to expand some energy on certain things. But David's way of going into a room and just being able to sort of speak to people about the right things that sort of turned them on and made them interested about him and about what he was doing. That was sort of an amazing thing to watch. Watching his auctioneering, he was, a famous auctioneer because he had the sort of wit and charm that sort of made it great. And I have this, three key things in auctioneering. I say, be quick, be funny, be humble. It makes a good auctioneer. And I think David had all of those. So it was great to watch him.
And why is the humility important? So you don't come across as sort of bombastic, is that the idea?
Well, it's not about you. You're the least important person in the room, really. It's about the bidder and the underbidder. You're just there to sort of orchestrate it. It's a bit like being a conductor or a sort of maestro. You're not as important as the members of playing. You're just there to make it all pull together. So humility is the key.
Except that you want people to notice you in a way. I mean, you're the focus of attention, right?
Yeah, of course. You need confidence. But I think a sort of quiet confidence rather than, I'm the most important and what I say goes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, you also got to meet Michael Broadbent, didn't you? I mean, Michael, he worked for Christie's for years. I mean, he's probably there 50 years, was he? Probably maybe longer. I don't know.
He set it up in 1955. He turned up at King Street and he said, "I want to set up the wine department." So they said, okay.
I mean, I interviewed him in 1986 and, he was a character. He was a very good raconteur. He was remarkably urbane, wasn't he? And fun. I mean, you got to meet him lots of times, or was he retiring back?
Yeah, at the start of my career at Christie's, he worked there. I mean, he was sort of long since retired from running everything, but he was sort of a senior consultant, if you like. He was an absolute character, really. A terrible auctioneer. That was the thing about Michael. He was always famous for being absolutely appalling on the rostrum. He hated it as well. There's a famous story about Andrew Lloyd Webber, where he was bidding in the room and Michael didn't know who he was. So he decided after two Lloyd Webber's bids to ignore him. So he just totally ignored him. And then after the auction, he got called into the chairman's office and said, "Why the hell are you ignoring Andrew Lloyd Webber?" And it came back to bite him because Lloyd Webber sold his stuff at Sotheby's.
Oh, did he? I wonder about that. Yeah. But you know, I think, but to be honest, he's not a bad judge. I think ignoring Andrew Lloyd Webber was probably what I'd do too. You can't say that.
No, but he was a great guy. And I remember we did the Avery family cellar down in Bristol, and Michael turned up with his little red book, and we went through all of the wines, and watching him taste through these vintages was amazing because he'd lived these vintages. And not just in a way that, you know, somebody sort of goes, "Oh, it's a nice summer," or whatever. You know, he literally remembered about the sort of, you know, fruit set, about different times that made this particular vintage great. So it was amazing to watch this sort of walking encyclopedia of vintage notes, really.
So that's what made him good at his job rather than the auctioneering. The auctioneering, was that because he was quite flamboyant, wasn't he? Were you saying he just wasn't that good at spotting who was in the room and reading the room as well?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, he just sort of, I don't think he was a sort of a details man in that instance. He loved the making notes and the packing up cellars and all of that sort of stuff. He loved all of the, you know, the details of wine and what made it really interesting. And he loved writing. That was his big thing. I'm not sure that he was a sort of a theatrical type, really.
But you are. I mean, do you remember your first solo auction? What was it?
No, it was wine, yeah, because I mean the way Christie's works is that you're a specialist in a department. So, you know, my love is wine, and that's my department. There is a few auctioneers, and so you get put onto other auctions sometimes. But I was terrible. The first auction, I thought I can never do it, and the chief auctioneer was like, "Oh my God, what have you done?" You know, I was in a terrible blue suit with didn't really fit, and the tie was hanging down my neck, and I was so nervous I couldn't get to grips with anything. So I think I did 20 lots and then stood down.
What, and they removed you, do they?
No, I don't know. I maybe just sort of looked at somebody and they thought, "Oh, we'll put him out of his misery." So you have to grow into it, don't you? I think you go into anything, and I've made an effort, and there we are, here I am. So
it was wine, because you've also done, handbags, haven't you? And jewellery and art, anything else?
Yeah, anything where they need a man in a camp jacket, you know, that's what it. Handbags I love, you know, that's a really great thing, and there's plenty of puns you can work on, the, you know, climbing the Himalaya and all these sort of wonderful things. And it's really, you know, handbags is a fun department. I love that industry, and it's always well sold. Jewellery as well is nice. I'm not so, you know, tuned up on old masters and that sort of thing, but I do love, you know, cultural stuff. So
I mean, I just wonder, are an auctioneer's skills transferable? I mean, you know, could you auction anything well, basically, or do you need to have in-depth knowledge of the subject to do it really well?
Well, in-depth knowledge helps because, you know, it's the last sales pitch. So I always say that an auctioneer can add atmosphere, but not necessarily interest. That has to happen before an auction, in that you get somebody interested in the lot and buying it, but you're adding the atmosphere to make them go a little bit further. So you can try and sort of, you know, catch an extra bid or push it a bit further and start a bidding war, that sort of thing. So, you know, I'd say knowledge is key in order that it is the last sales pitch, but really the thing is atmosphere and adding theatre.
I mean, if you've got knowledge, do people want you to just throw in a detail about the wine, for example, or a lot?
Yeah, sometimes it helps. And, you know, the thing about auctions is most people are just tuning in because it's not their job. They're just tuning in because it's, you know, a bit of fun that they're doing, or they like buying something. It's a hobby for them. So you've got to make it interesting. It's like tuning into TV. You wouldn't tune into something that was dry and boring and the person's going to stand there and say, "Here we are at 1,000. What's next?" You've got to say, you know, 1,000, try 1,100. It's the cost of a cup of cappuccino now. Or, you know, you just got to say something that's slightly amusing.
And what percentage of the people in the room are punters as opposed to professional people who are buying for the trade?
Well, I mean, almost. There's nobody in the room these days. You know, if the auction's been held on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock, then, you know, people have got other things to be doing, haven't they? So most people are online. The bids are in the book. The bids are on the telephone banks. We try and encourage people to come, and we always put wines out and nice things and set up the room in a nice way. So more people should come to live auctions. But, you know, the auction scene is changing now. There's a lot more online auctions. So the auctioneer isn't involved at all. It's just a sort of eBay style auction, which works well because you can track what's happening over a 2-week period. But live auctions have, you know, I think in a good way, because they're being narrowed down now to key lots that, you know, that can be sold with a bit of extra panache.
So if you're doing an auction in a room and people are watching it at 10 o'clock in the morning, they're watching it on Zoom or some closed circuit?
Through the Christie's website. Don't ask me the IT. They run it through some wonderful thing. I don't know what it is, but it all looks good.
I mean, is that hard, talking to an empty room? I mean, knowing that, I suppose it's a bit like doing an Instagram live, you know, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Let's put it out there and see what happens. I mean, you know, you've got things to play with, like their location will come up. So you say the bid's in Miami, the bid's in Puerto Rico, and then, you know, if it sells to Puerto Rico, you can say vendido, or, you know, just sort of add things or play with the telephone minimum bidders. If it's totally empty room, then it is really tough. And if you're doing 100 lots, it's not easy.
Tell us what your job consists of on a day-to-day basis, because people obviously see the glamorous bit, which is you in, these amazing clothes, doing the sales and being an extrovert. Yeah. But there's quite a bit of admin, isn't there? I mean, you obviously started doing that in the department, but you've still got to do that, haven't you?
Exactly. I mean, that's most of my days. Obviously, I don't post any of that on Instagram because it's deathly boring. But, I do enjoy it. Doing Excels is probably most of the job, doing emails with clients and that sort of thing. Being in cellars, or more often than not being in a warehouse, is quite a key thing. So you've just got to sort of get through the slog of preparing everything. I mean, the end game is obviously to sell things in an auction, but, that takes months and months of preparation.
I mean, the people bit is obviously the bit you seem to like most. Is the admin bit the boring bit in a way?
It's got to be done, hasn't it? I suppose it's the building blocks. It's probably not my, I'm more of a creative type. So I prefer to write articles about the wine, or, do interesting things, or I run the Christie's Wine Instagram. I love all that sort of stuff, but, all the rest is a building block to that. So I think I've learned over my career that you've got to be interested in the detail as well as the drama. Now,
I'm going to ask you to tell us a few things that have happened to you in auctions now, because I think Michael Broadbent told me that story about Andrew Lloyd Webber. I mean, just what's your proudest moment, the most embarrassing moment, and maybe the funniest thing that's happened to you? And the funniest and embarrassing might be the same thing. I don't know.
Yeah, probably. No, the proudest was probably you were involved in the 1821 Grand Constance that we did in 2021. Yeah. It was 200 years since that great bottle. I went out to South Africa and sold that, and we didn't know what it was going to go for. We put an estimate of 20,000 rand on it, and it took half an hour in the room to climb to 420,000 rand, which was amazing. And I just remember that moment, and then it sort of stopped, and desperate to go to the loo, so I dashed off. The room was in raptures, applauding. So I handed over to Michael Fridger, and he talked for 10 minutes about the history of it. But then the next morning was great, because I ran around Stellenbosch in the morning, and about 5 people stopped me to say, thank you so much for everything you're doing for South Africa. And, they were proud of it happening as a sort of moment to mark South Africa. So I was happy.
Just tell us, we're going back to the other things in a minute. Tell us a bit more about that lot, because it was amazing, wasn't it? The 1821 historic, obviously, but tell us where the bottle was going.
It was destined for Napoleon. So, he was on St. Helena, locked away, and he was still buying wine. I don't know how you can be sort of in prison but still buying wine, but he was. His favourite thing was 1811 cognac. That's why you get the Napoleon cognacs. But he also bought the Grand Constance, the same as other people were buying. George Washington, George III were buying it. So he was buying it. But I think he died in May of that year, so the harvest won't have finished, and he would have never got that bottle. So it ended up going to the Tabernacle at Niederberg.
So it was never shipped?
No, never shipped. So it's or maybe it did end up, I think, in the end the Duke of Northumberland's house at Alnwick Castle. But in the end, it's made its way back to the Tabernacle at Niederberg, and there it lay. So
did you get to taste it?
No, nobody tasted it. No.
What colour was it? It was red, wasn't it? Was it red muscadel?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, you could see it through the bottle, but the bottle was so old. It was, you could barely see apart from at the top. You could see a bit, but we did all stand around and look at it with Michael in the Tabernacle.
Well, that was your proudest moment. What about funniest or most embarrassing?
Embarrassing. I've done, a few charity auctions, and they're always a bit embarrassing because, you get some funny lots and whatever. I did one for a great charity. It's the Spinal Injuries Charity a few years ago. And, they were selling a villa somewhere. And I made a big thing about saying how this villa was so amazingly sort of secreted away and you wouldn't be able to get to it and everything. So I made a big thing about this. And then this lady shouted out, "Oh, is it accessible?" And I said, "Oh, no, not accessible at all. You'll be so secret. You'll be sitting on the veranda. You won't be able to see anything." And then she wheeled her wheelchair back and said, "I'll say again, is it accessible?" So, I mean, I blacked out. I just thought, but why didn't I foresee this? I just thought, oh
God.
Bad.
And funniest?
Funniest, I suppose. I mean, my key thing is always need the loo when you're on the rostrum because it makes you go a bit quicker. But, sometimes it leads you to be not quite as lucid as you should be. So there's a famous port called Coburn, and I accidentally called it Cockburn, of course, on the rostrum. And I think David shouted out, "That's something you need a cream for." So that was a moment I'll always remember. But there we are.
I mean, you once sold a bottle of 1926 Macallan single malt for 1.2 million for one bottle of whiskey. I just wonder, do you get nervous when the sums are escalating? And I wonder what it would be like if you were selling selling, a Van Gogh or a Monet that sells for sums that are truly astronomical.
Yeah, I suppose I just sort of knock the zeros off in a way, because if you start, you always know where the reserve is. So with that Macallan, we started at 800,000, but, in your head, you just sort of say, it's 80 quid or whatever. So then you're just sort of climbing up through the digits and it's a bit like that. You don't really know. I mean, that was a sort of bum clencher of a moment there. We didn't know where it was going to go. And I was probably a bit nervous about doing that one, but, it worked out in the end. And I've lost my record now. I think it's gone to 1.5 to somebody else now.
For what? Another whiskey?
From the same vintage, yeah.
So why is whiskey so expensive?
Certain ones are. I mean, that's rare because there was one barrel. And Michael Dillon did one label. Peter Blake did 7 and Valerie Amadei did 7. So, that was a sort of a rare moment where it was a 75-year-old Macallan, which is, like the Latour of whiskey. So there are certain ones where, if it's sort of ghost distillery or a famous distillery, things are well collected.
I just wonder, when you're selling something, I mean, do you think that you're working on behalf of the vendor or are you working on behalf of the people bidding, the bidders in the room?
Yeah, difficult question. Yeah, insightful. I'm always a bit of the both, really. So yes, you're on behalf of the vendor and you're trying to get, as much money for them, but, you also know the buyers, and the buyers will end up becoming your vendors or sometimes already are. So you're trying to get things for them for, a price where, when they see you, and sometimes you end up drinking it with them as well. So, sometimes so it's a bit of both. You're that sort of funny middleman where you're trying to be everybody's mate.
Yes, it's quite a difficult balancing act in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly.
I once talking of, famous bottlers, I once saw an interview where you said that wine is not an investment piece, it's a passion piece. And I just wonder, is it worth investing in wine? I mean, there are lots of companies saying, invest with us, your wine will go up more than a Rolex watch or whatever, or a flat in Holland.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're not in that gig, I suppose. The auction world is not an investment world. I mean, if people are buying for investment, that's, their business, I suppose. But I think that I like selling to people who love wine, and you've got to enjoy your wine to buy it, because there is no point really buying anything that you don't like. So hopefully people are drinking what they buy. Obviously in some cases that's obviously going to go away and be sold again. But, I'm always interested in sellers where we take a nice thing and then the blue chip sort of wines do well. And then there's other things at the end, sort of say like wines from Trimbach or interesting things from Spain where, people pick those things off. And then if those people are happy to share it with you or have a nice dinner. And those are the interesting wines really where, people are drinking them.
Well, and then maybe they're the interesting collectors, or when collectors are, maybe I should just say purchasers really. That they're happy to say, hey, I'll try some, Frederick Emile or something like that from Trimbach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's always fun. Exactly. Yeah. And people now, I mean, the investment world's changed. It used to be sort of Bordeaux, Burgundy and, a bit of Barolo, but, now there's other things happening. I mean, look what's happened with Commando G, for example, from Spain. Now that wine is selling for £300 a bottle in the wine bars of Tokyo or New York. So, wines like that are off the radar are becoming more interesting. Haven't yet made it to auction because they're not massively secondary market yet. But I think that's going to be the future, is really quirky things that are low production.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I mean, is the secondary market changing? Is it still blue chip? You say these things haven't quite made it to the secondary market yet, whether it be, Commander G or I don't know, some of the top wines from Argentina or Chile or indeed South Africa. I mean, not just. Yeah,
it certainly is changing. I mean, just this week we did an anniversary sale for Vineyard Chadwick and sold some old vintages from them. And, people love these things because they can't get them. And we did a little lunch, of it with Patrick McGrath and things. So, people love it when they can experience things and they find out the story about why it's interesting. We did the same last year with Tuara Limit. So things that are fun and you can sort of push the envelope a little bit of what is blue chip and what is collectible. I think that's really what excites me.
Well, that's quite an exciting, precisely, I like that word. I was about to say that. I was going to say it's quite an exciting bit of your job where you're not just selling stuff that we all know. I mean, anybody can sell Lafite, frankly, but, I'm not saying that it's not important to have a good auctioneer there, but it almost sells itself. Whereas if you're selling Terroir Limit or you're selling Vignedo Chadwick or you're selling, Lacret Percé from Argentina, there's a bit more work involved, isn't there? Probably a bit more fun.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's at a lower price point. So, you've got a bit more people to play with, I suppose. But it is a bit more fun because you're telling a story that you've never told before. And often you get to taste the wine as well because the winemaker is interested in making it work. So, that's always nice. And you find a different group of buyer. Often these people are younger. Often they're in sort of some fantastic place like Tokyo or, somewhere. And then or San Francisco, lots of buyers there. So, often these people are fun and interested in you and why you're selling it.
Yeah. Yes, I want to talk to you a little bit about fakes because there was a lot of publicity around Rudy Kernawan and other people who'd sold fake wines, not only through at auction but also through fine wine merchants. Is it still a case of buyer beware, caveat emptor? I mean, I just wonder what you can do to guarantee provenance and try and make it as...
Yeah, well, not really. I mean, I can't speak to the sort of the old days when I wasn't involved in the auction business. I suppose everything was a bit different and people didn't know as much. Since the Rudy thing, everybody knows a lot more. In terms of guaranteeing provenance for new wines, there's a lot more that goes on. So, like, for example, Parma's new bubble proof tags, those things are happening. DRC have got the sort of new UV light things going on. So there's all of these sort of things coming through. Of course, that doesn't help for old wines. And so the key to that really is provenance. And we've just got to trace exactly where everything's coming from. So you've just got to go back to the basics of, can we ask for your purchase invoice? And if you don't look where the purchase invoice has come from, then you've got to try further. So, if you're selling DRC, you want it to come from Corny & Barrow if it's in the UK. You want it to come from Sanya if it's in Italy. You want it to come from the agent in whichever country it is, or direct from the domain, which, is rare, but, it sometimes happens. So provenance is the key. And then just making sure that you have experienced checkers looking at everything. So, I've spent 11 years at Christie's. I've seen certain things, but I haven't seen everything. And so, further up the chain you go, the more people have seen, really.
And are there still a lot of fakes out there? Do you think there's still a lot of Rudy wines out there?
I know he's out now as well. He's out of prison, and who knows what he's going to do next. I mean, these wines must be out there, and it's up to us really to weed these things out of the market. There's so many things where we just say, look, we're not happy with the provenance of this, and we're not selling it. So then think these things just get rejected. But the difficulty is there will be someone who will sell it, and that is the problem. That there are big names like Christie's and Sotheby's that won't do these things because our legal department certainly don't want the hassle of the wine department, which is the smallest cog in our wheel compared to the art departments. But there are lots of other smaller auction houses and traders who might want the turnover from these horrible things, and they will take them on. So that's the sad situation there.
Because, what sort of comeback does a punter have if he or she buys a bottle of something, DRC, let's say, and it turns out, they take it to Maureen Downey, who's a, wine sleuth, and she says, oh, God, that's a terrible fake. Where'd you buy this? And they say, I bought it at Christie's. I'm not saying that's ever happened, but can they get the money back?
I mean, I don't know situations where these things have happened, but in the case of Christie's, I mean, I think there would be a negotiation if somebody wasn't happy with something, and then they'd see what happens. We'd have to do an investigation to see where things were happening, where things had come from. The benefit of Christie's is if it's been sold through a Christie's auction before, which by and large, because we've been running for 60 years, things have been, and you can go back into the archives and see exactly where things are from. So, you can trace a lot of things and see exactly what's happened. I think the bigger worry is probably, smaller auction houses where, they won't take things back if there's a particular issue.
Yeah. I mean, I just wonder in a way whether Rudy did the fine wine world a favour, that it suddenly made people realise that there was a problem, that these wines were being created on a significant scale. And therefore it's made people a bit more careful. I mean, I don't mean just auction houses, but also punters as well about what they're buying. Yeah,
that's probably true. I mean, he was a confidence trickster, really, wasn't he? And he's sort of taken everybody for a ride, but people that were, willing to sort of listen, I suppose, and this thing's happened, and you're probably right that it's blown it out into the fresh air, which is always the best place for anything, I suppose.
I mean, he was hiding in plain sight. I mean, if you watch the film, which I'm sure you have done, I think someone said, what do you do? And he said, I scam people or something like that.
Did he really? Wow, gosh. Is this the sour grapes thing? Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
And they just laugh.
It's amazing that he's out. He should just be sort of in there forever, but the American penal system.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, what sort of wines do you buy yourself? I mean, do you buy stuff at auction? Do you buy fine wines? I mean,
do I buy fine wines on my salary? No, I don't. No, I only drink fine wines. This is a key point, guys. If there's any young guys in the trade, always make friends with a wealthy older man. I think that's really interesting. You'll be a bit sore, but you'll never regret it. That's the key thing. That's the only way to drink fine wine is if someone else is paying. Me, myself, I just drink, interesting things. I drink a lot of South African wine. I love South African wine. Spain, a lot of the New World, French wines that are sort of lower level. I like things like Bandol, Trevelyan, these sort of things. I mean, they're a bit sort of fine wine, really, but anything really at a lower price point that I think is quirky. That's why.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about this already, but what are the fine wines of the future in a way? The wines that, not saying people should be investing in, but things they should be buying now because they can get them at good prices. You mentioned South Africa. You've mentioned Bandol. Anywhere else?
Yeah. Well, it's supply and demand, really. That's always been the key. So anybody that, it hasn't always been supply and demand because Bordeaux makes a lot of volume. But in why is Burgundy the darling of the auction world? Because they make less quantities. The same as, why David and Nadia Chenans are interesting, or, other things from other regions. If you make less bottles and you make fewer wines, it's always fun. So when you have 3 wines listed on your portfolio, then obviously people think you're more of a fine wine producer. If you've got 20 wines, then you're obviously more of a commercial producer. So I think producers that I'm intrigued by, things in Sicily could be fun in the future. Norello Mascalese up on Etna, there's a few things there where people are doing small production. Italy is a huge area that really is a bit of an untapped potential. Apart from Barolo and the Super Tuscans, there's plenty of things that could be interesting. But, the difficulty is the native grape varieties, and there's too much production.
What, pronouncing them, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. People understand Cabernet, but they don't necessarily understand Aglianico.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think Spain, you've mentioned Comando G, but I think the wines of Rioja and Ribera, I mean, not just because I write about them, but I think, Vega Sicilia has a good market, so does Bungas, but that's kind of it. I mean, there are not many wines. Yeah,
I mean, I'd love if Remel-Uri and these sort of things had more of an impact. And, what he's doing there with Terroir specific wines is much more interesting, I suppose. Rioja's a fun region because, Tondonia is probably the only, Tondonia, Mugo and, Cuney are probably the big things on the secondary auction market, but less Tondonia these days because there's now so much demand for it that Maria Lopez can't release anymore. She's
particularly
stuck.
The whites, right? I mean,
exactly. I mean, just can't find any.
Yeah. Tell us about charity auctions. You mentioned the one you did, which was your most embarrassing moment about whether the thing was accessible or not. But are these charity auctions different from normal auctions?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've got to be funny. I mean, it's after a dinner. It's usually between the sort of main and the dessert where everybody's had a bit of drink and, everybody in the room hopefully knows they're there to support the particular charity. And so it's your moment really to make some money for that charity. So, I always try my best. You always have to make a few jokes and do less lots. If there's a silent auction as well, you're there to big that up, but then do sort of 7 lots. And they're usually sort of holidays or, money can't buy experiences really, which are always fun.
So easy to get people to bid in a sense.
Yeah, hopefully. If there's nice things on offer and you've got a nice crowd in the room and you can, work out your room really. That's where working out a room is really the key thing. That's what I learned from David, because you're suddenly like, why does this person want it? Is their wife in the room and she doesn't want them to have it? And you can use that a bit. What can you use in the room to make this funny for everybody else?
And what about celebrity sellers? I mean, you said that Andrew Lloyd Webber seller went somewhere else because he was annoyed with Michael, but you've sold others. Christie sold the Sir Alex Ferguson cellar, didn't they?
Yeah, we did Fergie. Yeah, I joined just after Fergie. So a funny story about David, actually, when we were walking along Piccadilly and, those masks you see of the Queen or Prince Charles or King Charles. And anyway, he saw one of Fergie and he put it on his face and he texted to Fergie and Fergie came back saying, I don't make a fucking penny on that. Hilarious moment about David.
So are they different? Are celebrity seller sales different, or there's just another sale?
There's always a bit of a premium, I suppose. There's a move towards single owner sales in auction. If you do a various owner sale in order to get to your sort of, budget for the sale, then, it's trickier because you've got 20 or 30 or 50 vendors. If you've got one person, it's easier, obviously, to deal with one person. And if they're a famous name, then they have a bit of a premium. So there are celebrity people who collect wine, and these things don't come up for market very often.
But they don't sign the bottles or anything, do they? Like that? Or?
Sometimes they do. I think Ken Hom did when we did him. Did Fergie? I don't know if Fergie did everything. I think he did the DRC and the Petrus. Some people do.
Yeah, that's worth having, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it is if you like Man United, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you've mentioned this already about bidders, but I just wonder how much of your job is psychology. You've talked about reading a room. Just tell us a bit more about that, about how you do it. I mean, bidders, a bidder is not a bidder is not a bidder. The bidders are very different, aren't they, in terms of their personality and the way they like to bid.
Well, I mean, the most interesting thing is always the most important person is not your buyer, it's your underbidder, because you remember that person still has money to spend. So, if you know who the underbidder is in the room, then you can, move them on to something else. If it's online, obviously it's more tricky, but you have to remember their location or what their number is online. And then you can say, look, this could also be of interest to you if you're still there, that sort of thing. So the underbidder is always the most important because they're the person that bids up and they're the person that still has money to spend. So the underbidder is the person who's not got the lot, but they've still got cash and they're bidding and they could be bidding on something expensive, right? Exactly. So they're the important person. In the room, it's easier if there's people in the room and you can sort of play with them and, you can sort of make jokes about certain things or hopefully you know them a bit and you know the reason they want something. So, it's always a nice thing when there's people in the room. Yes, it's very tough if there's no one in the room at all. Tell us a little bit about the Channel 4 programme you're on, the Great Auction. I just wonder, you're kind of TV natural, I'd imagine. Oh, thanks. Are you enjoying it? Is it fun? Yeah, it's fun. I filmed it back last year, so it's on now, Tuesdays at 8:00, plug. So they contacted me through Instagram and said, look, we've wanted to do this for a while. But we don't want sort of, the usual run-of-the-mill stuff, daytime TV, auction stuff. So we're doing it as a primetime thing. And yeah, I've sold various things. Elton John's pinball machine, celebrity hair.
That went for a lot of money, didn't it? To the guy who owns Pimlico Plumbers or something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, fantastic. I loved it. And it's a great opportunity for puns. I had all of the, don't let the sun go down on this, madam. That's, it's all that sort of stuff. So yeah, no, it's been great fun. And it's been great to watch how they've edited it.
And will there be a second series?
Hopefully, fingers crossed. Are you watching it? Get the viewing figures out.
I did watch a clip that you sent me. I thought it looked very good, actually.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah,
there was a guy with tattoos talking about skulls.
Yeah, I didn't do that day, but yeah, I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? What people collect is so fantastic, Well, it's the stuff that Christie sort of doesn't do, but it's a nice sort of seg into these sort of quirky, really fun things that are going on in the collectibles market.
Tell us about your clothes. I mean, we have mentioned those, and you once joked that 4/5 of an auctioneer's income should be spent on clothes.
Did I?
You dress in a fantastic way. I like dressing, not quite as outrageously as you, but I like dressing colourfully. Just tell us where you buy your clothes from.
I'm never going to tell you that, Tim. I think you've asked before, but I don't want to tell about a tasting the same shirt as you. That would be no, thanks. I get a lot of stuff on the sort of internet, and then I have things altered or made for me. I'm going to an Indian wedding in August, and a lady in New Delhi is making the katani for me. So I have things that I just like. I come up with an idea in my head of what I want, and then sort of go out and search for these things. Really, so. A little bit too flamboyant sometimes, probably. But
it is the fact that that's part of your personality, but you can not only get away with doing it, but are known for it. Does that show that the auction world is changing? And I can't imagine Michael Broadbent would have worn stuff like that.
No, Michael's very Savile Row, but he had the money for Savile Row. I don't have the money for Savile Row. So, but the world has changed. We didn't have Vinted and these sort of things before. There was, eBay didn't exist in the same way. So, it's wonderful now because if you've got the time and the inclination, you can look for these things and sort of think, oh, that'll work with this. So yes, you need to have a creative idea, but you have the opportunity now to find these things.
Yeah, and I think you were saying that clothing was a way of showing creativity, but also
confidence.
A bit of confidence, I think, isn't it? That I'm the sort of person who has the confidence to wear this. I mean, I think
exactly. Well. Yeah, otherwise, you get the standard sort of blue suit or a grey or brown suit. It's the sort of standard things that happen in the wine trade. All red trousers. That's the other one. But I think colour adds confidence, and the ability to wear these things is not everybody's thing. And I always think the man should wear a brooch. Why doesn't the lapel is so boring? Well, you should have something on it. It's just there. So,
no, I'm with you. I mean, I'm not a tie wearing person. I think that wear fun things instead. Really.
Yeah, your shirts are amazing. Yeah,
thank you. Listen, tell us, how do you get away from wine? I mean, what are you told me that at the weekends you switch your emails off for a start. So you're not a workaholic, right?
No. God, is anybody in the wine trade a workaholic?
Probably not.
Maybe the successful people. If you earn more than me, yeah. I read a lot. I've probably got about 2,000 books or something. I read every day. I read before bed. It sort of switches me off. That's my big thing. I run a lot. That sort of takes out my aggression and energy on the pavement. And see friends a lot. Do a lot of theatre. Living in London, and that's a great thing because you can just rock up at the theatre and 20 quid and you see some great stuff. So.
Anything good you've seen recently?
Guys and Dolls at the weekend. That is amazing. Yeah. If you haven't seen it with the stage.
I've seen it twice. I thought it was so good. I saw it sitting down. I went back to do the promenades.
Oh, really? Oh, it's amazing. What they've done with the theatre is great. And I've just booked tickets for Andrew Lloyd Webber. As much as you dislike his music, he's done a second Phantom, Love Never Dies, which came out a few years ago, I think. But anyway, so I've got tickets to the concert version. And then I just bought the book that Frederick Forsyth wrote. So I read that in a day yesterday. And I was just like, it's great fun.
Well, it sounds like maybe you should engineer a chat with Andrew Lloyd Webber. Maybe he sold all his wine now, hasn't he, I think?
Yeah, he sold his wine. He still buys other things, I think. He's, an art sort of guy. And I'd like also to meet Cameron McIntosh. I think that would be great. I think he's a wino as well, but, great theatrical impresario. I mean,
and you also like matching wine to TV shows, don't you? Like Succession.
I've done that before, If you're watching Emily in Paris, I think you can only drink Prosecco, can't you? It's sort of, thin, insipid and not much going on. But,
and what about Succession? What did you drink? What did you drink with Succession?
I don't actually have Now TV, but isn't Succession, you'll have to tell me, isn't it a Cabernet show, I think? It seems like a serious brooding sort of thing.
It's probably a Napa Cabernet show, isn't it? Yeah, I think.
Yeah, glossy as well and that sort of thing. No, I need to watch it. Everyone keeps going on about it, but I must.
And just tell us about the future. I mean, are you going to stay with what you're doing now? I mean, are you still enjoying it?
The $1 million question, isn't it? No, I love it. Yeah. I mean, Christie's is one of those companies, you either work there for 3 years or you're a lifer. And it's one of those things that just gets under your skin. You enjoy it. They allow you to be who you want to be and do what you want to do. as long as you sort of do your job, it's, a great company to work for. And I'm doing all my other little things on the side. So fingers in pies. I think that's the key thing everywhere, isn't it? So that's your game too.
Fingers in pies. Pies. I like that. No, it's fantastic. Anyway, thank you for sharing so many insights about, I've learned masses doing this. It's fun, isn't it? About the world of auctioneering. It's just fantastic. And you do it brilliantly. And Tuesday nights, 8:00, on Channel 4. People can watch it.
Yeah, exactly. Watch that. Exactly. Or you can't watch it this week because you're in South Africa. So
I can't, but other people can.
Yeah, exactly. They should.
Thanks, Charlie.
No problem. See you later. Bye. Bye-bye.
I really enjoyed that. A fascinating and very honest insight into the way that auction houses sell wine. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the journalist Amanda Barnes, author of the groundbreaking South American Wine Guide. Join me then.
Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.